So at this point, if I may, I'm going to make a start and introduce panelists. So just briefly, we have those four organisations here, and individually, Alexander Kuller from UL Labs, David Mudd from British Standards Institute, Dara Galvin from the DCMS, Prabhu Ramkumar, and obviously myself. So gents, if you all like to come on up and take a seat. So at this point, if I can ask you, each of you, just to give a brief, tell us something about yourselves by way of introduction, and then we can get into the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Dara Galvin, Policy Lead in the Secure by Design team in DCMS. My background is in policy development and implementation. I've worked in the civil service now across a range of departments in different policy areas. I'm working in DCMS now in the Secure by Design team since January. So not too long, but also been there a fair while too.
Thanks. David Mudd from British Standards. I head up the digital and connected product certification. Been with BSI for 18 months. I'm trained as an electronics engineer with the BBC, then joined the RAF, then the MOD, then BSI. So too many TLAs really in my resume. But with that background of kind of electronics and electronic warfare, it's kind of fascinating to see what was amazingly high-tech and secret 25 years ago is now kind of all over the world today. So kind of, though I've been with BSI for just 18 months, a lot of the technology and the security issues and things we see have been my life really for a quarter of a century.
Thank you. Alexander Köhler from UL. I'm here in my function as a business development manager for cybersecurity. I'm with the company around about 18 months. From my background, I have an education in computer science and mathematics. And since around 2000, I have focused on information system security. And I think the most visible output of these activities has been in the field of trusted computing, which we will find today again in the space of IoT. It's considered from my point of view as mandatory. And in terms of regulation, I spent more than 2 years with the National Accreditation Body as head of the Competence Center ITIS and Data Privacy in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you. Prabhu from TIFSUD. I've been with TIFSUD now for nearly 15 years, worked globally, started in the UK, and then now based out of China. I graduated from Cardiff University with an engineering degree towards the late end of 90s, and done various risk-based roles over the last 20 odd years around the world. So, thank you.
Thank you. So what does the IoT world need? What does it actually need to be able to create secure products? And do we see this as being a blocker, if you will, to wider adoption? So I'm going to hand that over. Who would like to take that one first?
One point I can say on terms of blocking adoption, we've seen a lot of products come through, very interesting, very exciting, a lot of trials, but then a big reluctance to move from trials to mass adoption. I also read a couple of pieces recently on the consumer side of things as well. In fact, I was with a Smart Home Week forum in the UK in May this year, and again, consumer trust was coming more and more to the point. So we see both B2C and B2B more and more now. Yes, you might have a really good case study, but is the confidence there to move to adoption based around security? So right now I see that in discussions on a daily basis, that it is holding back adoption.
Yeah, in terms of what the IoT world needs to, so the code of practice sets out what kind of good practice looks like. It's a combination of a couple of years' work now with industry and government, kind of bring forward common sense and best practice approaches to IoT security in 13 guidelines. Also, I think kind of incentives for business too is one of the big questions. So take the code of practice, for example. It's voluntary at the moment, so a big part of our work going forward and at the moment as well has been kind of incentivizing business to adopt the code and implement all 13 guidelines.
Yeah, I think when we compare the lack of security with several years ago when it came, for example, for large IT organizations, I would say IT security was never on the hit list of lovely things to do. But today the scope is different. As soon as I go into an IoT device in the internet and provide services on top of that, it's basically another decision. If a company is doing this, they either do this as an innovator or they do this as because the competitor has done this already. The tricky thing here is, I think, this step towards providing added value is the main driving force here to make additional business, to generate additional revenue, respectively. Maybe the margins with the hardware product as such are not sufficient, so the step is to more sophisticated products, which is quite often then a connected product. And we have seen there the basic rules, what needs to be done in terms of security by design. This is, I would say, inside this room. This is motherhood and apple pie. But on the other hand, in the outside world, there's always the seduction about bringing, frankly speaking, cheap products on the market. And bringing cheap products on the market is not the way to address new services, to provide new user experiences. And I think there is a challenge, especially for the small, medium enterprises. For the larger corporations, they are aware about this. They have a chief information security officer and so on. I think there is a need to understand that security is, well, we say not only part of it's not security by design. I think it's very important for everybody who brings IoT device. That means to make a device quite often from a non-connected device to a connected device is security by decision. What I mean with that is we can consider today that making a product connected needs electronics, needs software, quite often software open source, the hardware platforms, very non-expensive, so that means it's pretty easy to build such a product. But if security is not considered, it will fire back. And that's the reason why making the decision from a typical product manager who has to decide for which price I will bring the product to the market, what are my costs, also in terms of sustainability, is something which needs to be considered at the beginning. We see quite often that the product is designed and then pretty short before launching the product, by the way, it needs security. No, we don't have enough money to do that. That's definitively the wrong way. It fires back. And with upcoming regulations, if this feedback loop is there, that more and more products come in the market this way, obviously the regulators will step in and provide more restrictive rules. That's a standard reaction. So what I'm saying here is, when we consider today the security, it needs to be done in the education with the customer. Say, security needs to be considered right at the beginning, then it's a fine thing. We have seen in the IT departments the usual stuff that an XP, the Windows XP device, it's running somewhere in a factory since 16 years, never updated and this stuff. It works. By doing anything. I have learned from the automotive industry, connected cars now, they have quite a lot of connectivity built in. The rule is pretty simple. We need about 7 years to design the car. The car, and this model of car, will be usually in the field around about 7 years again. So if you sell the latest car, the last one, if you sell the last car, maybe it runs 15 years. So we are close to 30 years where we have to think about, in a connected car, about security. And this is a challenge for automotive, this is a challenge for a white good manufacturer to a certain extent, And okay, the challenge now is there for the engineers, for the security experts, to provide those services, to provide those products, that this kind of products will survive during this time. It can be done. If it has priorities, that the design will be done this way. In the industry, the design will be separated in this way, that a part is safety related, another part of the coding will be security related. So from a technological point of view, it can be done. So, and this changing mindset is necessary. You come to the decision and say, before, and the typical product manager, now I launch this product for this price point, for this level of profit, needs to be considered already security, and maybe sometimes even say, okay, no, for this price we cannot sell it, looking that we have this product in the market for quite some time, and we need to consider spend money on security.
Can I just very quickly, it's going to just say, we see time and time again, somebody comes to us with a product, say, we've got a new IoT product, can you help us? First question I ask is, why are you doing this? And too often the responses are, because everyone's doing it, or if we don't do it now, we'll be out for 7 years. So just stick the technology on there. There's no strategy. See it time and time again. And I've used the quote from Jurassic Park before, too busy thinking about whether you could, you don't think about whether you should. Unless it's bringing any value on it, too often these products are out there and it brings down the overall level of security, and it brings down the overall level of confidence. We see it time and time again. I'm sure in this room, the reason why we're all here is because we understand that and we want to move on. But just to say, against that framework, we see what you're saying every single day. Yet another product comes out. And I say, I don't want to speak to your engineers. I want to speak to your sales and your marketing people and find a good reason why this is bringing value to your customer before you bring it to the market. Sorry.
You'll bring problems.
That's a fair comment. But before I share my comments, I just want to get a feel from the group. Do you think lack of security is holding back the IoT? It's a good question. I was thinking more from company's perspective, because we work more with B2B. But people raise their hands. Were you thinking products or manufacturers or consumers? Or let me ask the question the other way around. If it's consumers, do you think consumers are not buying products because it's lacking security? Yes, there's a few yeses, but mainly no's. And the other way around, do we think that manufacturers are, we have our hands already, yeah. So from our organization perspective, we work with a lot of startups and also established firms. And what we see is startups, and again, depends on the region. If you go towards California or Shenzhen, it's different from working in startups in Europe. They don't think twice about security or safety. They think about functionality. They think about what is right for the consumer finally and trying to get the product to market. So they have a completely different mindset when it comes to regulations. The established firms who try to innovate have processes in-house, and they tend to look for regulations, but they're struggling internally whether there is a need or not. Because on one hand, they have to move forward from a product creation perspective, and on the other hand, if they don't comply with the regulations, the internal quality management team is going to kick them. So we see this divide within the product groups from automotive to consumer to medical, and it's slightly different depending on the risk of the product. So it's not a clear yes or no based on our experience. So it really depends on the space that we're talking about. And in terms of what is needed for creating IoT secure products, I think a couple of the colleagues mentioned here that trust is extremely important. If we are inviting somebody home, we kind of have a feel for who we are inviting home. And IoT products are similar. We're opening it to everybody. Are you comfortable opening your door to anybody to walk in and walk out? Coming back to the B2C question you asked, none of us would say yes for that question.
But if you've got kids and they're buying everything off Amazon and storing it around the house.
Yeah, so this is where education comes in, and possibly the problems in the current environment highlights that we need to treat this differently. And trust within this industry is extremely important, and trust is a simple word. At the same time, it's complex, because behind trust is traceability. Do we know who's coming in and out of the system? Do we know who is behind that system? So identity of the person behind. So there is a lot of things behind trust that needs to be in place. And the biggest T that I can relate to is team. Because no individual organization, be it a certification organization or a product manufacturing organization, can do this on their own, because it is complex. So again, it's just to say that industry is definitely not holding back, and everybody has to work together if we are to bring together this regulation that protects not just the consumer, but also the organizations. Richard?
Great comments. Okay. Good discussion, I think. I'm just, before we get to question 2, I'm just going to make a small observation, which is, I think, and you're illustrating a point beautifully. One of the challenges for IoT is it's a highly innovative marketplace. And ironically, security doesn't have a unique problem in that marketplace. It's the nature of startups. You illustrated it. It's that whole organisational thing. Traditional OEMs will have a QA department. They will have somebody who's responsible for safety. Startups in general, we've all seen it. You know, the Kickstarter is littered with projects where they say, yeah, we're going to be ready in 3 months. We've just got regulatory to do. And then you see the, well, okay, there you go, we've seen it. You know, 2 years later, yeah, we're on another iteration. We should get certification this time, you know. So I think I would just calibrate the conversation, if I may, and just say, I think it's part of the nature of the beast. It's because of the organisation. So it's not security in itself, but it's just, we're in a high...
Do you see that tends to drive people to the big guys? It's kind of a generally... What I've seen is, from a consumer perspective, when people are looking to buy and they are concerned, when there isn't a clear trust mark or a clear guidance on it, they'll either buy a brand name they know, or they'll buy the cheapest thing out there because they're rubbish, or they won't buy at all. So that kind of problem like this, because this is where we see the people that are most interested in actively driving forward common shared understanding and best practice tend to be the SMEs, because they seem kind of disadvantaged. They might have got good products there, but people think in this area of lack of trust, I'll go with a big brand name that I know, or I won't buy, or just buy the cheapest thing out there because they're all rubbish.
So one thing I've observed, David, in there is some big product manufacturers do it very well, of picking up the technology and the service from a startup and merging it with their regulatory framework. If there is no governmental framework, they have their own high requirement. And these organizations, I guess, I don't want to name anybody, but there are a lot of leading innovative organizations that is doing it very well. And that's something we're also seeing that quite often. So it's, again, getting the balance right and working with the ecosystem.
Okay, that sounds like a great note to move on to question 2. And we're almost... okay, we're almost there. So it's almost a continuation of you know, what does the industry need? Who wants to jump in there first?
So when we ran our consultation earlier this year on the Secure by Design reports, one of the big things to come through from industry was, one, code of practice is great, but kind of when is it going to be mandated, and if so, when, and what will it look like, and how are you going to help us comply with it? And so kind of, as we announced last month as well, we finalized the code of practice. We'll be looking to regulate it. We started the work for that too. And even on that announcement alone, there was big support from industry and a lot of stakeholders we'd previously engaged with saying, great, at least we have certainty now. And going forward, kind of we have a clear idea that we need to look to implement this.
When we look globally into what people seem to want more than anything is a level playing field that's clear. So I have seen around the world lots of well-intentioned companies wanting to manufacture products that are compliant. And we'll go back to John's earlier point here, compliant mindset versus security mindset. Right now, there is a compliance mindset, and maybe that's what we need to focus on early enough, because people want to be compliant but need clear guidance and a level playing field. What I've seen is you've got a common understanding of what the main vulnerabilities, risk areas are, but then various different interpretations, mostly at guide level and this kind of thing, that haven't really boiled down into clear sets of standards yet. Therefore, people are looking for, I say industry is looking for some kind of level playing field of guidance that is consistent, and instead what we've got at the moment is kind of a hodgepodge of standards, no real level playing field. Two companies could go into place on the market now products, one of them with no security whatsoever, another one fantastic, and it wouldn't be clear to the purchaser which was better.
Yeah, I see a certain difference between want and need, yeah. And I think what everybody wants is, or let's say this way, maybe this is too much a German view, but it's about to have freewheeling, no regulation at all. But the disadvantage of this is, in the meantime, we see there's a certain education, the discussion in industry associations, and come to the point, well, not a good idea. On the other hand, I'm in the field quite often about Industry 4.0 with larger manufacturing organizations, and what they say, well, sometimes we don't know what to do because the regulation is not yet there. Okay, so I think in this, if somebody has this attitude, we need to step back and say, okay, what do we want to achieve? Yeah, we can label security as quality, we can label it as good engineering job, whatever it is. If a company comes out the market and is convinced that they have a good product, yeah, it doesn't make sense to have a good product but bad security. It's a part of the product. So, and with this attitude, everybody can step forward. And a certain percentage of companies doing this way, to gain the transparency. GDPR is a great example, yeah. Before, there was no need to structure GDPR or privacy-related data. They were, frankly speaking, somewhere in the enterprise. And if a customer calls and say, I want to get my data deleted, had a problem, no? There were a lot of disks distributed somewhere, and no idea really to have a management system to that. So I mean, that triggers a lot of structure, and this is needed to step forward. That's the reason between want and need, I think there is, if I put the point need, is that everybody asks for regulation, so we know that what we have to do now. I think it's the better understanding here is, and that's what we tell our customers is, look, the common sense here, the common denominator is that you want to make a good product. And there are some basic, like security by design, like the guidelines which have been developed. Now, it is available, those tools. And we had, the last 2 years, also interesting example in Germany, when the regulators start to regulate critical infrastructure, also energy distribution for electricity and gas. What happened? It was about a window of about 2 years, or all the energy distribution companies, and it's around about 1,600, so you have here the deregulated market. Those 1,600 energy distribution companies, from the small one to the big ones, were asked to get certified. I said, no, it's not possible. Yeah, this is not sufficient time. We will not find the certification body. So, but this very simple point was, do you have already, in this case it was us, to have an ISMS in place. Do you have already an ISMS? No. You see what I mean? The certification is not the point. It's a point about, do I have the processes in place? In terms of IoT, do I have a secure product development cycle? I am questioning, is it possible for me, when I have developed a patch and I need to distribute it, do I have the processes in place to do so? Do I know what in my product is? Other the questions about, we call it software bill of materials or asset management. So these foundations, are pretty independent from regulations. And if there's an understanding from manufacturer, and when I say understanding, must not be experts in-house. No? They can use partners, they can use subcontractors, they can use companies like yours, yeah? This is possible. No? And we have seen a blueprint, I think, in the space of GDPR. Also, I know many law firms being the GDPR officer for companies. And they serve 20, 30 companies doing the job as the GDPR officer. That's great. So I get the expertise, and nobody inside a toys manufacturer thinks that he has the legal competencies to run the GDPR part of the business. And the same way, if I have the security expertise in-house, okay. If not, I can find it somewhere. So in this attitude, decision, I spend money on this, I provide quality products, and at the end of the day, security is a part of my quality, which is today, by the way, standards for me is a manual, certification is the second part. But for example, there was a step now in the automotive market segment. There was what I would say a de facto standard for suppliers. And for those suppliers, it was basically a quality management system, which makes sense that the OEMs has to sell their suppliers. You have to have a quality management systems, otherwise I get lousy products built in my car and I have a problem. So, and around about 2 years ago, inside this package of traditional quality management, suddenly cybersecurity has been implemented. I think that's the right approach. It's a part of the full story. You cannot provide today, as a supplier in the automotive industry, an electronic gearbox, without cars are connected, without having the tools to manage security. And I think these are this way the thinking about. I consider, in this case, in the automotive industry, now security as a part of quality. That's great. If this mindset goes this way in every space, that's terrific.
That's true. If I can't disagree with that.
So I was going to say, is now a good time to move on to, as it were, some of the things we've talked about earlier in terms of actually where we get to. So this is a great one, particularly given the intro. I'm actually going to suggest, given that the session is primarily about compliance, and Stacey's done such a great job, that if I may, I'm going to suggest, with your permission, I'm going to skip this one, because I think Stacey really kind of answered that question. So this is probably a good one. Stacey touched on it. I guess, Dora, you're probably the first person to... Yeah, I was going to say, I think you seem to be the obvious one for this one.
Sorry? Yep. So yeah, in terms of Etsy, we started the process back in June. We're looking to finalize negotiations now for the Etsy standard in January. And kind of, as Stacey touched on in the earlier presentation, kind of it's great. We'd have kind of a mini standard ready to go and a tangible standard there alongside the code of practice. And then it's in terms of next steps, what do we do? At the moment, kind of we're feeding in and kind of, working with EU colleagues to influence the direction of travel when it comes to cybersecurity and IoT. Kind of, we see the Etsy standard as kind of one more thing to bring to the table, really, to influence colleagues. We're also kind of heavily engaged as well with NISA and keeping up to date on what they're doing and keeping them up to date on kind of the work we've been doing as well around the code and other things too.
Don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. So how do you see... It's an Etsy standard that's European. It's obviously driven very much by the UK. What do you feel, bear in mind the current situation, everything that's going on, is there kind of resistance or acceptance, or is a genuine path to it being seen as a genuine European standard, or something that has been pushed from the UK side? And very obvious question here, but important to me, having built a scheme around this and thinking, yeah, great, excellent, an Etsy standard is just what we need to make sure that we get recognition globally, but only really if it kind of gets traction through Europe.
Yeah, colleagues that have brought kind of the code of practice to the table and to Etsy and things like that have commented kind of everyone's been in agreement. It's really kind of well supported. I think the fact that kind of we're looking to finalize the standard by January now in such a short space of time kind of evidences the fact that everyone in the working group anyway seems to be on board.
And I'd just say again, British Standards, having involved a lot in standards creation, it's phenomenal how quickly this has moved. And that is absolutely incredible. When I first heard you were taking it to Etsy, I was thinking, great, we'll see that in 2 years' time. And then, as I've seen, looking at the updates on the website, you know, talking January or February kind of time, that really is incredible. I mean, from our perspective, when we're looking to kind of get traction, and then that's IoT Security Foundation as well as BSI, to be able to have an international accepted standard reference, that is probably the single most important thing when we're trying to get acceptance and understanding of what we're doing. I see it's been tremendously important for adoption of what to me makes a whole lot of sense as a pragmatic way forward. To have, just quite simply, to have a European standard reference by it will be a big help to what IoT Security Foundation wants to achieve, and certainly BSI as well.
It's good to know that it's going very fast. How active are the ENISA guys involved in that process?
In the Etsy process, I'm not too sure in terms of their involvement.
Could you use the microphone? Sorry.
I'm not too sure in terms of kind of how actively they've been involved in the process to date with Etsy. I know that kind of this is the same team within kind of our department that are pursuing the Etsy kind of avenue are heavily engaged with ENISA as well. So one would presume kind of they're both talking to each other quite a bit.
The reason I asked the question is ENISA is pushing the European regulations quite heavily. For example, in Germany, the German BSI is constantly publishing guidelines in addition to ANSI in France. It's also picked up in your research. And my fear is there's a lot of guidelines out there, and none of the guidelines specify exactly what the manufacturer needs to do yet. And unless the industry addresses this problem, you know, the document will be there, the standard will be there, adoption is going to be hard. So one of the things I ask everybody is to really say, okay, how do we take this guidelines and best practice and to really make it a practical teamwork that is accepted by the industry? It has to be vertically driven. So that's another thing that's also coming up, that the DCMS, the 12 points is really good. It works very good for the consumer products. But when you take it to the automotive industry or the medical industry, robotics, and they're like, yeah, it's very basic. I need a bit more, something a lot more comprehensive. So I think it's, again, learning together to say it's good that activity is happening. How do we bring this together? Although not directly answering that question, it gets to the discussion.
Yeah, okay. I am from Germany, but I agree exactly what you say. Also, when it comes to the British standard, yeah, what we have seen here, that the British standard has, a proven track record. How British standard has developed from the foundational work, yeah, and has been then ended up as a blueprint for international standards. So, I think that's the right way, and this was in the past has been proven to work very well. At this moment of time, I'm a certain way concerned about what's going on between France and Germany. They are very minded about military government, high level of security. And this is not really rational. This is more about keeping the influence. No? The point here is we speak about 27 countries in Europe, so there is a need to consolidate this and to consider, for example, IoT in the industry space. The requirements are different, and I think when it comes, for example, to standardization, to have IEC standards, ISO IEC standards, that's the way to do the business, because most of the businesses we serve are the manufacturers. It doesn't end up in Europe. No, they have also to sell their products in US, in China, in you name it. No? So, what we always need is a global view, and with such a global view, we have tools available, like for example the inside Europe, the NLF, and so on and so on. So these tools, we have seen CE marks and so on. There's a lot of tools available, and by the way, that is regulated. These tools can be used. And when it comes to a standard, we need to go, I think we need to go this way, not following this path of getting the IoT security dominated by high security requirements and dominated by government, because it doesn't fly. Yeah? There are never enough resources to serve this market, which we expect with IoT devices in different market segments, different type of IoT devices, different security requirements. This is something which needs to be done under the aspect of international standards, which can be moved flexibly. Yeah? And we see today, for example, in the manufacturing space, we have to switch very fast components. Now we have pilot factories. It's difficult to believe, but this way, there are now pilot factories in IoT, and they do it this way, that the components on the manufacturing floor are not anymore interconnected with cables, they are interconnected with 5G. No? So we have here the need of a high level of flexibility, and that means also that components needs to change. When, for example, in the automotive industry, it will change from one model to the other. Okay, that needs this kind of flexibility, and this, frankly speaking, we will never achieve with common criteria. That's a joke. Yeah? And therefore, we need also the help and more for the industry to push and say the industry has to sit in these committees. The industry has to have the influence to move things forward under the European view. That is one part, but also on the worldwide view that we are really support this flexibility that is needed for everybody to make IoT security happen.
I was going to say, that's, if I may, that sounds like a great point. That's a really good sum up as in terms of, industry needs to move forward. So I'm going to suggest at that point, if I may, sorry to cut you off slightly there.
Just one thing to add in there, you touched on NLF, the new legislative framework. That is the framework we have in the EU for pushing safety across EU. And bringing security into the NLF is a lot more structured, because then we're not reinventing the wheel in a different way. So that's another way of all of us working, using the existing framework of NLF and bringing the new world into the old world, rather than creating a new set of rules for the new world. And it's easier for organizations to adopt them. It's just something that you mentioned. I thought it's worth reiterating it.
Well, that rather neatly picks up. That's really, if you like, one of the whole points behind the foundation, of course. We've not tried to write, so just so everybody's clear, we didn't set out to write a new set of requirements. If you look at almost the totality of the compliance framework, it's not new. It's based on standards that already exist, and that was the whole point. Because, as you rightly make the point, it's just too big it's too big a ocean to boil. So, if I may, I'm going to segue on because I'm mindful of the time in the session. So, we're starting to go down this road of okay. So, what there were a couple of pieces there, and they're probably good points to pick up on, which is we've started to talk around the whole piece of does every product get certified? We've already started down that road. That first off, that's just clearly impractical. But I think this is where we start to talk about okay, so are we what form should this take? And obviously this is something that's very close to the foundation's heart.
Can I just say, taking up your point about the NLF legislative framework, how things are structured, and again, I think it would be great to think that every single product that could be connected should be independently tested and verified to be secure. That's quite, as you said, not practical. But going through the process of, okay, it really comes down to a risk assessment. What is going to be both the threat and the impact? And from that, then looking at potentially where that boundary lies of what things need to be independently verified and not. But at least going down that path, which then really fits down to the existing framework, existing there right now. The one thing we were talking about earlier, before the panel discussion, I think is absolutely critical, is that the right skills are there within the organisation to make that decision. And that's one thing that we see right now is lacking. We have companies coming to us with what they believe are very good, very secure products, and saying, can you just independently check and verify this? And we find all kinds of things that are wrong. So I think going down the principal path of the kind of self-assessment and risk assessment path, I think is absolutely the right thing to do. And that way is the only way this is going to work. But there has to be some way of assuring that those decisions are made by somebody who's got the right skills.
Yeah, I would like to endorse this. There's basically nothing to comment. It's the same opinion which we have and which we see for quite a long time. And I'm aggressively against taking security does not apply in such a way that we can use NLF. Hello? NLF is is a European regulation. It was in 2008. Now we are 10 years later. It has proven it works. Yeah. And some arguments are, yes, cybersecurity is different. It's so dangerous. If I come back to Germany, I look around. It's pretty dangerous. What is about cybersecurity? In a certain way, it starts to get a certain political momentum. Yeah, and we need to say, if I have missing product safety, my toaster can burn down the home. Yeah. But my malware has not yet burned down my home. Yeah? So this is something which is largely exaggerated, and the NLF is definitively the right framework where a lot of people have thought about it, has proven, it has a structure, it has a lot of manpower behind it to make it happen, and it can be 100% applied to cybersecurity. And I think we have to fight for this, even at this moment of time. Some interest groups try to deviate for this. And I was in the panel discussion last week, and there was one white good manufacturer. He asked, why the hell are we now have the need to follow two different frameworks? The NLF and now the one from ENISA. It doesn't make sense for us. No? That's double booking, it's double costs. And this is something we have to work with the industry that say, hey, wait a minute. Now instead of having cybersecurity as an additional minor element on top of the efforts which you do for safety and functional safety, now you get two different huge building blocks. No? That's not a good idea.
Again, you just mentioned security and safety. In German and French, same word. Why do we split it out into something different? And again, that framework at the top, that, I think, overarching, that's absolutely right. Underneath that, then everything else fits into the way we do business elsewhere. We just look at that risk assessment and then look at where is there really going to be value added by independent verification and where isn't it? And, obviously, from our business side of things, we would love to say everything should be independently tested, but we're pragmatists on this as well. There's got to be a balance there between having formal testing against standards, independently verified, and the ability to self-declare where appropriate. I think that's been absolutely critical to making this work.
Okay, if I may, because we're running out of session rapidly, it'd be good to get through the rest of the questions. So, one of the obvious questions, so where do the panellists think the foundation can contribute to the conformance process? Now, we've got our own ideas on that, but it'd be good just to briefly get your takes on that.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to dominate the microphone here, but obviously I'm a large part working very closely with Richard, John and the team here, and definitely getting that, something that BSI is very dear to our hearts, is getting consensus opinion on best practice and setting the example and facilitating both discussion, agreement on what this looks like and bringing it forward. And being that, coming from industry, being independent of government, being independent of any one overall organisation, I think puts the ITSF in an excellent position to be the facilitators for determining and bringing forward best practice.
So I think in the UK, working with at least the 3 certification bodies here globally, and DCMS, in bringing what it's brought to the table in terms of the study, in terms of the framework, the work is brilliant. And now it's up to all of us to take it and make it more meaningful in taking these guidelines to practical approaches and using existing frameworks within the European sentence framework using the NLF and adopting it would be the way forward. So we're all in it together, going together rather than it's another certification scheme. And also picking which verticals we want to focus on, in addition to taking the framework forward.
On that point, I know the discussions within IoTSF, all these things about this doesn't necessarily apply to industrial or to medical, totally understand that. But I think the point here was there's a huge, the area where the biggest void is the consumer area. So if we can make the biggest impact anywhere, let's start there, then these other areas may be coming on to. So totally accept that not all of this is going to be applicable to other areas where you might have got 62443 or other standards there already. However, I'm putting words into your mouth. The whole point here is this was the biggest area, I understand, and what you wanted to focus on to start off with. So I totally agree. Let's get it there for the biggest area where we see a need. Mm-hmm. Do it within the overall existing overarching framework rather than create something new. And from that, hopefully it will spread to the other areas as well.
I think the message now is what you have presented in terms worldwide look. Yeah. Take into consideration what's going on worldwide. I think the message is for IoTSF to continue this path. Sometimes it may be a little bit frustrating that you have to repeat, yeah. But I think at the end of the day, this kind of tenacity, yeah, will lead to an influence. And I have heard already a lot of dissatisfaction with what's going on now towards the European Cybersecurity Act. Somebody escaped in the discussion and said, yeah, okay, it's not perfect. And then we wait for the Cybersecurity Act 2.0. Huh? Yeah, and I think influence the and transporting the message to the relevant stakeholders. And I think important part are those who produce these products, no? That they gain momentum, that they gain visibility with this tool, with those tools, yeah, that they feel good with that. I think that's the best way, even if it maybe takes some time, but it will work out. I'm convinced that it will happen.
Okay, thank you very much. As I feared, we might get a little bit tight for time. Thank you very much to all the panellists. If you'd like to show your appreciation in the usual way. And with that, I'll hand back to John.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, panellists.